Dear viewer, imagine a continent so rich in resources that it could feed the entire world, so vibrant in culture that it inspires the globe, and so full of potential that it could redefine the future of humanity. Now imagine the same continent held back, not by a lack of talent or ambition, but a crisis of leadership. This is the paradox of Africa, a land of boundless promise, yet plagued by leaders who failed to rise to the occasion. Why does this happen, you may ask? Why does a continent with so much to offer continue to struggle under the weight of ineffective, corrupt, and often self-serving leadership? The answer is not simple, but it's urgent because Africa's future, and indeed the future of the entire world, depends on understanding and addressing this crisis. So let's delve deeper into the roots of Africa's leadership challenges, explore the forces that perpetuate them, and chart a path forward towards a brighter and more equitable future. To understand Africa's leadership challenges, we must start with colonialism, a period that fundamentally shaped the continent's political and economic landscape. When European powers partitioned Africa at the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885, they drew arbitrary borders with no regards for the ethnic, cultural, and linguistic realities of the people living in this continent. These artificial boundaries grouped together diverse communities with little in common, creating nations that were inherently divided. This division laid the groundwork for internal strife, ethnic tension, and governance challenges that persist to this day. Colonialism was not just drawing lines on a map. It was about extracting wealth and resources to fuel the industrial ambitions of Europe. The institutions established during this period were designed to exploit, not to empower. Colonial administrations focused on maintaining control and extracting resources rather than building sustainable systems of governance or investing in the development of local populations. When African nations gained independence in the mid-20th century, many of the new leaders inherited these extractive systems. Instead of dismantling them, some leaders simply stepped in the shoes of their colonial predecessors, perpetuating a cycle of exploitation and inequality. The period following independence was supposed to be a time of hope and renewal for Africa. However, it quickly became apparent that the transition to self-rule will not be easy. Many of the leaders who emerged during this era were more interested in consolidating power than in serving their people. Authoritarianism became the norm, with leaders using every tool at their disposal to silence dissent and eliminate competition. One of the most common tactics was the manipulation of political systems to ensure that leaders could remain in power indefinitely. Elections were often rigged.
Do you think that the constitution needs to be amended, or it is okay as it is?
Constitutions were amended to extend term limits, and opposition parties were suppressed. In some cases, leaders declared themselves presidents for life, effectively turning their countries into personal fiefdoms. This concentration of power stifled political competition, innovation, and accountability, creating an environment where leaders prioritize their own survival over the well-being of their people. Corruption is perhaps the most visible symptom of Africa's leadership crisis. It is a cancer that eats away the fabric of the society, diverting resources from crucial sectors such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure into the pockets of the elite. From embezzlement to bribery, the forms of corruption are varied. but the impact is the same: a betrayal of public trust and a hindrance to development. The roots of corruption run deep. In many cases, it is a legacy of the colonial era, where the states are seen as a tool of personal enrichment rather than public service. Today, weak governance systems and a lack of transparency enable corrupt practices to thrive. Leaders who engage in corruption often do so with impunity, knowing that the institutions meant to hold them accountable are either too weak or too complicit to act. Corruption has far-reaching consequences. It undermines public trust in government, discourages foreign investment, and perpetuates poverty and inequality. It erodes the effectiveness of public institutions, making it difficult for governments to deliver essential services to their citizens. In many African countries, corruption is so pervasive that it has become a way of life, with citizens forced to pay bribes for everything from accessing healthcare.
I've never driven a car. I don't know how to drive, but I have my driving license, as you can see,
to obtaining driver's license. Africa's diversity is one of the greatest strengths, but also it is a source of division. Ethnic and tribal identities, which should be celebrated as part of the continent's rich cultural heritage, are often exploited by leaders for political gains. By playing on these divisions, leaders can consolidate power, rewarding their own ethnic groups at the expense of other marginalized groups. This strategy of divide and rule is not new. It was a hallmark of the colonial governance, but its persistence in the post-independence era is a testament to its effectiveness. The result is a political exclusion, where loyalty to the leader trumps competence or merit. This not only undermines national unity, but also it perpetuates a cycle of conflict and instability. In many African countries, political parties are organized along ethnic lines, and elections are often seen as a zero-sum game where one group wins at the expense of others. This creates a winner-takes-all mentality, where the victorious group often uses its power to reward its supporters and punish its opponents. This dynamic fuels resentment and mistrust between different ethnic groups, making it difficult to build a cohesive and inclusive society. Africa's leadership crisis cannot be fully understood without considering the role of external forces. Foreign powers and multinational corporations have often supported corrupt and authoritarian leaders to secure access to resource or geopolitical influence. Both the United States and the Soviet Union backed African leaders who are willing to align with their respective blocs, regardless of their commitment to democracy or human rights. Today, multinationals continue to play a significant role in shaping Africa's political landscape. In many cases, these companies strike deals with corrupt leaders to exploit their continent's natural resources, often at the expense of local communities. The revenues generated from these activities rarely benefit the broader population. Instead, they are siphoned off by the elite or used to fund lavish lifestyles. International financial systems also play a role in perpetuating Africa's leadership crisis. Many African countries are burdened with unsustainable levels of debt, which limits their ability to invest in development and create a dependency on foreign aid. This dependency often comes with strings attached, further eroding the sovereignty of African nations. One of the key reasons why Africa struggles with bad leadership is the weakness of its institutions. In many African countries, the judiciary, the legislature, and the civil society are either too weak or too co-opted to hold leaders accountable. This, in turn, creates an environment where leaders can act with impunity, knowing there are few checks on their power. Weak institutions also make it difficult to implement and enforce policies that promote development and good governance in many cases. Public institutions are underfunded, understaffed, and poorly managed, making it difficult for them to deliver essential services to citizens. This lack of capacity undermines public trust in government and creates a vicious cycle of poor governance and underdevelopment. Despite these challenges, there is reasons for hope. Across Africa, there are signs of a growing demand for better leadership, from youth-led movements demanding accountability to the increased use of technology to promote transparency. Citizens are taking matters into their own hands. The question is, how can we harness this momentum to create a lasting change? First of all, we need to strengthen our institutions. The key to good governance lies in strong, independent institutions. This means investing in the judiciary, the legislature, and the civil service, and ensuring that they are free from political interference. Strong institutions can act as checks on executive power and ensure that leaders are held accountable for their actions. Number 2, promoting transparency and accountability. Corruption thrives in the shadows. By promoting transparency through measures like open data initiatives and freedom of information laws, we can shine a light on corrupt practices and hold leaders accountable. Citizens must also be empowered to demand accountability from their leaders through civic education and engagement. Number 3, encouraging democratic practices. This includes term limits, free and fair election, and peaceful transfer of power, which are essential in preventing the concentration of power and ensuring that leaders serve the people, not themselves. Political parties must also be reformed to promote inclusivity and reduce the influence of ethnicity and tribalism. Number 4, fostering regional cooperation. Many of Africa's challenges are transnational in nature. By working together through organizations like UN or African Union, countries can share best practices and can tackle common issues like corruption and conflict. Regional integration can also promote economic growth and reduce dependency on foreign aid. Number 5, investing in education and economic diversification. Education is the foundation of development. By investing in education, we can empower citizens to demand better leadership and hold their leaders accountable. Economic diversification is also essential for reducing dependency on resource extraction and creating sustainable livelihoods for citizens. The issue of bad leadership in Africa is not just a problem for Africans. It is a global challenge. A continent with such vast potential, home to some of the world's fastest growing economies and the youngest populations, cannot afford to be held back by ineffective governance. The solution lies not just in the hands of the leaders, but in the collective actions of the citizens, civil society, and also the international community. Africa's future is not predetermined. It is a story that is being written, and each of us has a role to play in shaping its narrative. By addressing the root causes of poor leadership and building a new paradigm of governance, we can unlock the continent's immense potential and create a future that is worthy of its people. The time for action is now. Let's rise to the challenge together. Thank you.